Phil, were you were you going to say something?
I don't think it was going to be productive. It was going to be funny, but it wasn't going to be productive. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm a natural fit. I decided that, also in principle, I'm going to drink the last of my bottle of Russian standard vodka in private. Because I have told people it's the house vodka here, but now
I actually have a much better vodka option for your needs. Which is the vodka of Iceland.
Yeah.
Which I think should be our new sponsor, given we want to meet at some point in Iceland.
So, I mean,
oh my gosh.
And how Icelandic of this company to have a coffee cup with a carabiner as the handle.
Yeah. It's true.
I hope that on the bottom of the cup it says not a life-saving device.
No, it does say on the other side, lava first sight, which I think is right.
I think that's awesome.
Great. This is our new sponsor.
And by the way, the vodka is amazing. It's one of the best vodkas I've had. And I've had lots of Scandinavian vodkas like Finlandia and things like that. And this is something else. It's really, really good.
Yeah. No, but what I was thinking is, I think last year I asked you guys for like body shots. That's not what I mean.
Clarify again.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver.
Awesome.
But like full, like head to toe, right? Because I like to put them on the thing. So I don't know if you got other.
You need to stop talking. Stop.
Yeah, right. Fully clothed. Now this is PG. PG-13 because Phil said shit. So
that's what's new about this season.
Yeah, that's right. In season 5, they're drunk all the time,
and they're naked. It's
exactly in Iceland.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I'm Chris Lockhart. We have with us Phil Yanov, Oliver Cronk, Wendy Keene, and we are talking today about, I was going to call it narratives, but I think it's really about storytelling. It's really about effective communication and the way in which we communicate our ideas to our peers and our clients. Consultants, I mean, this is bread and butter for what we do as consultants. And I think it's worth a discussion. And I think we've got some pretty good examples, and you can see it around the world every day. Going on of effective communication and not so effective communication. But Phil, I know you've thought about this more than I have. So I'm wondering if you can sort of help describe, your view on this, because you had a good take in the pre-roll.
Yeah, I think that if you cannot tell a story, you cannot enlist others into your endeavor, whatever that might be, right? You have to be able to plant a flag. You have to be able to create a vision of where you're headed. And, and I think it is why people, for example, might ask someone to work with them as a consultant in some space. They can't tell this tale on their own. For some reason, they're inside this bit and they can't see it. They can't tell it. And they need someone to create that external narrative arc. But if you've got a story, then you can create a vision of where you're headed and people understand it and they will follow and they will all come in line. And better yet, they'll communicate it to each other, right? But if you can't get a story right, I mean, they're just wandering around because no one knows exactly what to do. And I've got to believe that everyone that we are talking to has been in some project and they're going, I don't think this guy knows where he's headed, or I don't think this guy knows what we're up to. I know I'm lost, but I think he might be lost too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of you read the book Sapiens, but one of the things I found fascinating from Sapiens was how effectively civilization is basically just shared storytelling. And that was one of my big takeaways from the book, and it's so true, right? Everything from currency to organizations to nation boundaries is a story we're all sharing. It's not a natural thing; it's something that we have in human culture and civilization. And so, the really interesting thing about our ability to kind of cooperate and work in a business setting and do consulting is ultimately, as Phil just said, that kind of shared purpose, shared mission, which. And the best way to convey that is with storytelling, because we're kind of programmed, it seems, or have evolved to kind of share stories and tell each other stories. So no, I think it's a vital skill. I think it's hard though. I think it's easy to sort of say, "I'll tell a story," but the reality is it's actually quite hard to do that, particularly if you're used to being in the nuts and bolts or the detail of the subject matter, like an SME in a specific space, and then all of a sudden you say, "Oh yeah, but you need to lift your head out of that space and tell the story." It's easy to say that to someone, but really actually sometimes quite hard to create the right analogies and the emotional connection that's going to get people fired up.
Yeah. And, not everyone has the skill set, right, for that, right. Or feels comfortable doing that sort of thing. Right. And, I know people, I'm sure we all know people that approach the world in a particular way, right? Like my wife said, like in accounting and finance, right? So she deals with numbers and things all the time, right? And I deal in the world of, I'm a history major, right? Let's talk about, so we approach things from different perspectives. But I mean, Phil, you had an interesting story that you were telling me about the board game conference that you went to.
Yeah. Yeah. And, by the way, I think the thing is when you break it down, and at least one way I've heard this is that some people are, their intuition, right, or their natural way of working. Some people are really good at working with people. Some people are really good at working with things. And some people are really good at working with ideas. And I don't know if that's a measured kind of a thing, but I think it's a useful framework for kind of thinking about how we're talking to people. So I was just telling the story about how I went to this board game convention. I went with another really smart friend of mine who's really good at playing games. But he and I noticed when we were there was this energy because we were playing two different kinds of games. I like games where you are playing the people at the table. You are playing against and with them and trying to figure out something, right? Whereas he was playing a game, and his style of game, and this, I know it sounds pejorative, right? But I feel like it was accounting for points or something, right? But the whole idea was, it was like you were doing little engineering drawings of towns and villages. Now, it's a great game, and people love this game. But I was sitting there thinking, there's almost no interaction with the other players. I am never at any point either coaxing or coercing or bullying someone at the table as a game, right? Because that's what some of the games I play are about. I like to bluff. I like the social deduction stuff. But I think in this, that was an ability is I'm naturally built, my brain is wired to tell a story at the table and to either engage people in the story or tell them a story to kind of influence them at the table. That's the game I like to play. The game of let's keep track of this set of numbers and let this thing, not my game. But he, as an engineering bent, was naturally wired for that and was really good at it. And I just had no aptitude at it.
So that's like a framework, right? For that. And I know, Wendy, we just talked not that long ago about business architecture and frameworks, right? Is there a framework for storytelling here? Do we need a storytelling architecture? We have a new role, TM, trademark, the storytelling architect.
I do really like this, though. I think this is, Phil, as you say, there's people, there's ideas, there's things. I think there's a lot of truth to that. To your point, Chris, there is storytelling methodologies, right? Just look at the hero's journey. A lot of people will go back to that. There are tons of classes today and even tons of storytelling frameworks. There are even storytelling canvases. I've seen a really good business school class for leaders so they can tell their strategies through story. But I also think to the people, things, ideas, humans are really different. I work with a lot of architects and engineer types, and it is true that they are not as comfortable in storytelling. We're focused on the idea, we're focused on the thing, and it's really hard for us not to show all our work and tell all of it. So this is where I think it's really powerful to team up with people who can tell the stories both verbally and visually, because I think the visual side is also a really important part of this as well. So really drawing on multiple strengths.
When we were talking about architecture, business architecture, and you were, I think, talking about, or maybe it was Oliver talking about, that connection between all of the different elements of the business, right? And how that basically is telling a story, right? About here's what we do and why we do it, and all that sort of stuff. I think, there's some of these, I was telling you guys, I think about, a colleague of mine, and it's like, and we've all known these people, right? Super smart people, right? No question about it. But, just unable to communicate an idea in a way that lands right with a particular audience.
Yeah, no, I've got a tangible example of this one. I think so I was working on a transformation project to kind of move an organization I was working at, sort of productivity systems from on-prem to cloud. And, initially, I think I was far too obsessed with the technical kind of advantages and bells and whistles. And then it was kind of, after sitting down with HR and the sort of change management function, I kind of I needed to kind of paint a picture of what the benefits were to the organization, and I ended up coming up with this house analogy, actually. So I ended up talking about certain things being the foundations, like identity and access management, to being able to identify who our employees are and, securely access things. That was kind of like the foundations of the house. And then on top of that, you had things like, document management, document collaboration, office, productivity, things like that. And then at the top of the house, you kind of had more differentiated experiences for our employees and knowledge management on, the kind of core offerings of the business and things like that. So, but painting it as a house really, really worked, because I could kind of use analogies like, getting some really bespoke house versus a modular sort of, huff house or something, or putting in a bespoke kitchen versus getting something off the shelf. So it kind of allowed me to kind of explain the different choices we had as part of the technical program in a way that people sort of understood. And I think that was the first time I think I flipped out of just putting up some, complicated systems diagram, or, putting up a whole load of bells and whistles from a technology perspective. I think it was the first project I actually flipped and went, you know what, no, actually I need to kind of create some slides, some visuals here that my stakeholders are going to understand. But it's interesting because now that some people get accused of being a PowerPoint architect, right? Because that's what they do. They create they create those visuals, but could you then go and crank out the code? Well, no. And it's interesting how we almost kind of start sort of telling people off because they're good at this, but actually it's, as we just said, it's a really valuable role to play, I think, and people shouldn't be ashamed of being a PowerPoint architect, because actually there's a lot of value in it.
I mean, maybe it's, the fact that it's PowerPoint, right? But as the delivery vehicle, people look at that, oh, it's a trivial, idiot-proof, sort of thing. But the reality is that crafting a logical narrative that is both vertically logical, and also horizontally logical. In other words, throughout the whole story, end to end, as well as within an individual slide, right? I mean, that's not easy to do, to craft a story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that when we see one of these personality types that we're talking about sort of diminishing the other, and it's basically them just saying, I don't really understand it, so let me just make it look like it isn't very important compared to what I do, right? I mean, that's super easy, and I get that, but that's just the way people are wired. I mean, how do I feel significant? Sometimes I feel like I must have to crush someone else to get there. It's just that way. Some people are like that.
And I was going to make a flippant comment, Chris, about how isn't that what you pay a consultant for, to create a very nice slide deck? Kind of.
Well, no, but there's something to that, right? It's like I already know something about this, but I don't know how to articulate it, so I'm going to hire McKinsey to help me articulate it. God, that would be expensive, but I mean, you get my point, right?
And is that what a CEO does, really? And the actual CEO of a corporation creates what the story is and allocates resources to particular decisions? Because, none of them can actually write code, or, I mean, typically, right? There's a whole bunch of things that have to be done they can't do. But what they can do is cause the story to coalesce about where we're headed.
There is definitely a skill and a power in being able to logically tell a story, right? Break down complex things into simple. But I think there's another really important thing that underlies that, and it's an empathy, right? It's not just following, some framework to break it down, but really saying, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, does this meet where you're at right now? Does this meet your needs? Would this resonate? Would this land if I were in those shoes? And I think that's a really important part of this and part of the talent.
I completely agree with you, right? I remember someone telling me, a partner a couple of years ago, that, because we were on a project and there was some issues or whatever, and I was freaking out, and it's like 3 a.m. and, it's like, we gotta have all this done by 8, right? And that sort of thing. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? I'm like, this could end our project if we don't get this right. He's like, none of that matters. I'm like, this is the story. This is the story. We got to get the story right. So it doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, because the client feels good. We've made the client feel good about something. So the actual story, report, status, all that, the appendix, right? And all this, that bit is important, but it's not critical, because we've made the client feel good, right? The emotional thing. And I think that's what you're saying, right? Is that the story is not just the logic. It's got to connect, right? It's got to inspire, right? It's got to do all these things. And, not to be, we by the way, we tend to make these things so that, as Phil said, they're evergreen, right? These consultants saying things podcasts, but, there are things going on in the world right now where you can see stark contrast between someone who stands up and leads, right? And someone who doesn't, right? And so I think, it's that emotional thing. And just to point it out and to highlight it, would the world have rallied around the Ukrainians without sort of the inspirational leadership of their president? And I don't know, maybe. I'd like to think so, but I'm skeptical.
Well, but I think, is it like any story? And I want to get back to something to something that Oliver said, which I think is an important set of ideas, right? And when you talk about *Sapiens*, the book by Yuval Noah Harari, right? His point, and I never remember if I use his language or it's something I've used later, but it's shared subjective reality, right? So we create this image of what we want the world to be or how we think the world works. And of course, the examples he gave and Oliver gave as well was, currency is a shared subjective reality. Let's face it, that little green piece of paper, at least for me and Chris, that little green piece of paper in our pocket, doesn't really mean anything except that we believe that it means something when we hand it to somebody else. And it could be anything, our flags and ideals and all that kind of stuff. But the way we get people to enlist is to be able to tell a story. And then that story gets told in a bunch of different ways. Back to Wendy's point, right? Some of us are visual learners. And so some of us need the PowerPoint because that really is a battle flag. It's not just us putting some words up on a slide. It's like this, our flag means this. This is what we're for, right? And then there are other people, like they learn from reading, right? They are readers. And so they have to see the words on the page. But in all of this, we're using the story to build trust so that we will cooperate. Because otherwise we would never do that. We are not, we would cooperate. 5 of us could get lunch together, but we couldn't have 3,500 consultants, thinking about like some of these big banks, working on collaboratively, supporting a financial institution, right? That's an enormous task. And without shared subjective reality, it doesn't happen.
So how do you get there? Because I think some people hear storyteller, right? And they think, I just got to be a good talker, right? Or, you see some people and it's like, well, they're just up there doing this, right? And they're weaving a great story, but there's no substance, right?
Yeah.
Where's the risk there?
I was going to come on to this actually, because I think one of the things, again, similar sort of time frame to the previous example I gave about the collaborations of the platform project, I had a bit of an epiphany, which is there's almost this kind of continuum of people, from the sales people who are just all about selling something, but perhaps, and I'm sorry, I'm going to make some sweeping generalizations here, perhaps don't understand the depth of what they're selling, but all the way through. So they're kind of, stereotypical, locked in a cupboard programmer who never sees the light of day, who, is perhaps amazingly gifted at, Python library XYZ, whatever it is, right? So really super detailed, and they're really passionate about it. But if they want to then convey why what they're working on is important to the business, they really struggle, right? Because that's not the world they live in, as per our point earlier. And for me, it was interesting sort of in my career to sort of look at people through these different sort of, where are they on the continuum? Are they very confident, perhaps sometimes in danger of being arrogant and overconfident in some cases? Or are they suffering from imposter syndrome because they know their stuff, which generally means they know what they don't know, and therefore they're uncomfortable speaking about it because they fear someone's going to pick holes in what they're talking about. So I think getting the balance right between knowing enough, and it goes back to, I can't remember if it was on one of our episodes or on Architect Tomorrow, talking about this kind of T-shape or V-shape people where you know enough depth, but you have the breadth. And I think the breadth thing is the communications, the communication, stakeholder engagement, and emotional kind of engagement sort of piece. Because Chris, I really like what you said about, it's really about how you make people feel. So if you make people feel like you understand something, even if you don't, if you make them feel that way, they're going to be happy with what you're doing. To your point earlier, so I think it's one I think that comes with experience and knowing your audience, reading your audience, and knowing whether you need to go to Phil's point about giving them lots of detail because they're analytical and they want to read, so you have lots of bullets or lots of kind of handouts to give them, or they're very visual and or very financially orientated, numbers orientated. So it's a tricky one, right? But this is what makes it an important skill in the consultant's kit bag. So once you do know how to navigate this communication sort of problem, the world is your oyster.
So you said you've in there. You said it comes with experience. So I mean, I guess the question is: this something that if you're a new consultant, you can learn to do? Are there things are there tips and techniques? Are there tricks, books you should read, that sort of thing? Or is this I need repetition? I need cycles doing this to get good at it? Or are some people just naturally gifted at this?
I think there are people that are naturally gifted, and then you can work at it. I think I guess if I look at myself, I've kind of always had reasonable communication skills, but I think I really had to work on honing them and making them more relevant in the business setting. Whereas I think other people, I think it's a self-awareness thing and a self-improvement thing as much as anything else. I
agree with that, Oliver. I think some are gifts and some are leanings, as we're saying, and then there's certainly ways to learn it through direct methods, like I said, storytelling classes and things like that. But there's also so much you learn by watching other people and by doing. I think about being a very young consultant and just learning how people put together PowerPoints. Or I had an illustrator, a really amazing gentleman that worked for me, and I was like, how do I learn this? How do I get better at this? And he's like, just watch, just look at stuff, just find what interests you and start using it and start copying it. And so I think it's a very evolutionary way to get better over time as well.
I think the thing is, so if you were to give advice, right, to someone who says, look, I feel like I've got a deficit here, right? And how might that deficit manifest itself? Places I've seen, it's like, hey, you know what? I try to get people to do a thing with me and I just never seem to be able to get them together, right? That's a good example. I am frustrated. I mean, I think another story, I've seen someone come to me and their story was, I am frustrated because people don't seem to trust me. And they weren't a person without virtue. The problem was they didn't realize that they had mannerisms that basically made people not trust them. And they needed to work in that space. And it was great because we got to work together on those things with him, right? But I think those are two symptoms that you might have in that space and say, I can't bring people to me. They don't seem to trust me. Why is it nobody wants to do what I'm trying to get done? They all got their own thing. What is it? And so I think in that space, those are the signs that like, wait a second, I might need to be able to tell a better story. I might need to spend some time on it. And as Wendy's pointed out, watching people do it, if you're curious and smart, you'll watch people and you'll get those things figured out. There are books, there are all of that kind of stuff. But I think just beginning with the question of, what is that cat thinking? What are they worried about? What are they afraid of more than anything else? What are they afraid of? And if we start with the ideas that everybody, they want to be successful, they want to be significant, they want to feel like they belong. If I can solve those core needs somehow through what we're doing, I can get people on my side.
The irony for me for this one, though, is often the people that need that the most really struggle to break out of some habits they're in. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I've seen some people that are really, really smart, but the way they talk just immediately switches people off, right? Because they come across as this like know-it-all, that their way is the best way. And it's really quite sad, because sometimes you want to kind of take them to one side and say, do you know what? You've got some great ideas, but you're just kind of completely, your lack of empathy and your lack of, kind of bringing people on the journey with you is completely switching everyone off. So it's really frustrating, because you've got a great idea there, or a great concept, or a great project, or technical innovation, but the way you're talking, everyone is just like, no, don't work with that guy. He doesn't listen. And ironically, they're the people that almost need that inner voice to kick in and go, why aren't people listening to me? Well, it's because, but it's not going to happen, because it's almost self-fulfilling in a way.
If you're listening, if you're one of us, right, and you have a really bright friend with strong ideas that can't get people to follow them because they're harsh, the way Oliver just described, raise your hand. If you can think of even one person that doesn't get stuff done because they're cranky and difficult, not because they're not the smartest person in the room.
Are you talking about me, Phil?
And it's none of us. That's the best part, right? It's none of us.
It's not me.
Yeah. It's definitely not me. It's that guy over there.
Yeah. But I mean, Oliver's telling this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know who he's talking about. I know that guy. I mean, maybe I am that guy some days, but there's lots of times you feel like, oh, I know that cat. I mean, and it's like, you can be the smartest cat in the room and not get your ideas across because nobody wants to listen to your shit.
Yeah.
They've given up listening to you.
So if you're starting out at Accenture or something, I decided I won't beat up on Deloitte anymore, Oliver. You're starting out at Accenture and you want to get better at this, right? What do? Is it just watching? Is it some sort of cognitive based therapy? Or it's like,
I think Wendy gave the pieces of that, right? I certainly think that there's a little bit of something in either our EBT or CBT that is of value to you. But I think just starting with the idea of like, can you be curious? Can you ask yourself, what are they thinking? Or just ask, hey, you know what? I want to make sure I'm listening here. What is it you feel like you're trying to get done? And if you feel like there's something I'm not listening to, tell me. If I'm not hearing a thing you think is important, please tell me.
On one side, there's getting better and improving. But on the other side, it's also perfectly okay to borrow the talent sometimes too. Maybe you're not that good or comfortable. Bring a colleague who is, right? Bring them in, leverage other strengths and let them leverage yours as well.
And I like that. And I think there's another failing in some people, which is the lack of ability to delegate, right? And feeling like you're the only person that can talk about something. Well, actually, sometimes you aren't the right person to talk about it because you're too in the nuts and bolts. So actually getting a colleague along and saying, do you know what? I need to convey this, because they come at it from a completely different perspective. And this is often why I really like working with the change managers and the program managers, because they would just say, Oliver, yeah, I get it, but you've just made it way too complicated. So why don't we just explain it with a 4-box model or whatever? And that's brilliant, right? Because that's where you're collaborating. But again, it comes back to this, and the point I was going to make is self-awareness. I fully believe, out of all the training I've done, self-awareness is the biggest superpower you can have. Because unless you're self-aware and you're comfortable with your weaknesses, right? And I know it's that horrible, cheesy interview question, what are your weaknesses? But
I care too much. That's my reason.
I'm too humble.
And you can over-index, right? You can start, and I think I had a bit of this a few years ago where I almost became so self-aware. I was like nitpicking everything, right? And then it destroys your confidence. And you get real imposter syndrome going on. So I think getting the balance right is critical, but having a degree of self-awareness and then doing something about it and going, right, is that something I can improve? Or to Wendy's point, is this just something I need to collaborate with someone on? Because I know it's a gap and therefore teamwork is going to be the way to get around that. But I genuinely think the consultant skill set Yeah, there are lots of consultants out there that are often quite senior and quite arrogant, and they get away with it because they're a subject matter expert in X, and therefore people have to bring them in because they're the only one that understands, I don't know, financial tax regulations in farming, outsourcing, whatever it is, right? So I know that's complete nonsense, but never mind. But I think there's a lot of times in the consulting skill set where you just need to kind of be aware of who are you and where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses.
Yeah, I mean, you dropped the 4-box model there in your bit. I thought you were going to go to like Porter's 5 forces or something like that. Right?
I was aiming to drop in as many consulting cliches as possible in that one segment.
Let's get a 2 up or a 4 up on this page. And yeah, anyway, but okay, so that's good. So if you're not good at this, or you think you want to get better at it, there's some things that you can do. You don't want to go too far, Oliver, as you pointed out. This is all in the vein of like, I want to get better at expressing the thing that I'm thinking about. What about the often necessary, but sometimes slightly more nefarious part, which is I need to take something that's bad and represent it as not so bad, right? In other words, the spin part of this, not lying, that's unethical, but there's ways in which you can tell stories, right? This project is red, but we have a way to get it to green and it looks like this, right? Or whatever the thing is, but sort of that, let's not focus over here on the awful part. Let's focus over here on the good part and move forward. Where does that play, or does it?
Yeah, the thing is, when I know that something is terrible, I know that there's somebody out there who doesn't see it the same way. And they might be able to find some other thing, right? So it's kind of like where Wendy was talking about bringing somebody in. Maybe someone else could see this thing. But the thing is, it's like maybe sometimes you just call the thing what it is. And it's like, you know what? I know we all want to be at point Y. And today, let's acknowledge we're at point X and there's a journey ahead of us, right? But here's the thing. We're going to do this thing and we're going to do it together. And we're going to learn something. We're going to learn to trust each other. And it's not always going to be easy. Let's create, and so I think you can create a story about what a journey looks like, right? And I think Wendy mentioned the hero's journey as a prototype or as an archetype, right? That's a great thing, right? I mean, it's hey, here's the hero. There's the refusal of the call. There's the, there's the person that comes in to help, right? The Obi-Wan. It's like I can't think of a mentor, right? But there's an Obi-Wan that comes in to help. But there's and then there's the challenge, and then there's the return, right? So if you really love archetypal storytelling, then you should go out and read those books because they will tell you those pieces and how they work. But there are YouTube videos that are 20 minutes long that explain the entire technique that you can go out and figure that out.
I think consultants do. But I think often they're picking the wrong story archetype, right? Too often they're not picking the hero's journey. They're picking the stranger comes to town, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. And, I've come to town to save the day, right? I'm Clint Eastwood riding on my horse into the...
That is exactly the biggest problem. And I see this all the time. And what I explain to them is, you are not Luke. You are Obi-Wan. Your customer is Luke, right? Your customer is the hero of this journey. You're the cat in there to help them.
Customer sometimes could be Darth Vader. It could be.
That's up to you. That's up to you. Yeah. It makes me crazy. But you're right. You are absolutely right. It's the stranger comes to town, right? I am the cat that's come in. I'm here to save you. Look at this.
It sounds like if someone's listening and it's like, I think this is a bunch of BS. It's like, well, no, this narrative piece, the storytelling, the communication of ideas, right? All of that piece, critical to any skill set for a consultant. And to get better at it, there are some tangible things that you can do. I think probably repetition is probably a big part of it. And to the self-awareness piece, Oliver, I hesitate to say, but perhaps age plays a part in that as well, right? The older you get, maybe the more self-aware you get, or maybe some people get less self-aware. I don't know. Any other last thoughts for the cats on the ground listening out there?
Well, I can only reemphasize the point which Phil has recrafted as what's the cat I'm talking to thinking, right? Back to the empathy, because that also is going to make sure you're in the right story and you're the right character in that story for the clients as well.
You know what? Yeah, I'll take that and give an example. So at the moment, the one question I ask people when I'm being asked to kind of come to a meeting, Oliver, come and convince these people to do this. I'm like, fine, give me some information on who I'm meeting. To Wendy's point about empathy and like, what are they going to, what's going to work? It's kind of like read the room, but in advance, if you can kind of get ahead, that really helps. But yeah, no, I think, I've banged on enough about self-awareness, but I think just being conscious and mindful of the situation. What is the task? What is the kind of project? And what is the mission that you need to convey? And I think the last thing I didn't quite get a chance to say was the people I admire the most are the ones that can tell those bad stories that we were just touching on in a really constructive, positive way. Like, yes, we're going through a massive cyber attack, but here's the root cause analysis, and here's how we work forward to know that this won't happen again, or it's very less likely to happen again. Those are the people I really admire. Like, it's relatively easy, I think, to kind of give a story around, like, yeah, we've got this new project, it's going to be transformational, it's going to be amazing. But the people I admire the most are the ones that can kind of do that crisis management and sort of stay calm and kind of navigate people to calmer waters in difficult situations.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point that you're looking at people you admire that do this well. And, I read a lot of history books and stuff like that. And so, there's always this idea of the great man theory, right? Of like the great consultant that comes to town to solve the problems. And, I think that can work if it is tied to something tangible. So I think of someone like an Elon Musk, right? That's like, I'm going to go to Mars. That's the story. Right. And all this other stuff we're doing and the flamethrowers and like all this other stuff is part of that narrative. But how inspirational is just the original? We're going to go to Mars and we're going to live on Mars in big rockets. Right. And I think, so there's sort of this level storytelling, but it's rooted in something that he's actually doing is actually tangible. And I think, that's useful. And so, I think you can't just be the great talker, right? You got to have the slides underneath, right, to back up the story kind of thing. Where's the appendix for the story? I don't know. Phil, last word. What do you think?
I mean, I think we've got the points here, but I was trying to, what could we do? We could give them as sort of practical advice. And I really think that, go find storytelling videos on YouTube where people speak authoritatively and can help. I think those are great. Oliver started with a reference to what I think is one of the great books everyone should read, which is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And there's 2 companion books, also excellent, well worth reading. But the hero's journey, that is, of course, an idea that was kind of brought to us and crystallized in Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. And I think that's a very powerful tool for telling stories, something that gives you kind of a broad overview. One of the books that I read very early in my career was Harry Beckwith's Selling the Invisible. And basically, he kind of laid up the point that we're in an age where we're selling ideas and we're not selling stuff anymore. And we have to change the way we present those ideas to people. And one of the most powerful ideas was we're not really trying to sell people the best anymore. We're trying to we're trying to explain to them that this is not going to hurt, right? That basically no harm gets done in this space and that we can be trusted to deliver it. So basically it's risk aversion is really what's on their mind, not I need the very best of this thing or that, but how can we help them minimize their risk in an area of so much uncertainty? So I like all of those. I think that's it. I think that, someone who is aware and interested, they're going to go find these resources. But these are a few of trusted voices in my own world.
Well, thank you guys. This is interesting. I learned something about storytelling that I didn't previously know. So that's good always. And just on the empathy thing, there is therapy for empathy. And I've taken it. And it's not bad. Maybe I need more, but who knows? Well, we'll go with that. Listen, thanks everybody. So we'll see everybody next time. Cheers.